Good afternoon, and welcome to Practical Practice Tips for Widely Used Dietary Supplements webinar. We're excited to have you this afternoon, and thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to join us. This is the second webinar in 2014 that SCIPTA has hosted jointly with the Council for Responsible Nutrition. My name is Grace Esden, and I'm the Solutions Manager with SCIPTA, the company that powers the technology behind Generation MP and Pharmacist Society. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the knowledgeable scientific team at CRN. Today's speakers are in order of go. We have Duffy Mackay, who is the CRN Senior Vice President of Scientific and Regulatory Affairs, Andrea Wong, who is the CRN Vice President of Scientific and Regulatory Affairs, and last but certainly not least, Jim Griffiths, who is the CRN Vice President for Scientific and International Affairs. Starting us off this afternoon is Duffy Mackay, so I'll turn it over to you, Duffy.
Thank you so much, Grace. We're really happy to join with SCIPTA and provide this educational opportunity. A little bit about the Council for Responsible Nutrition. We are a trade association that is a Washington, D.C. based trade association that represents functional food and dietary supplement manufacturers, both the ingredients that go into the products as well as the finished products themselves. A little bit more about CRN. We have about 105 members, with half of those being manufacturers of finished products and half of those being suppliers of the raw materials. We also have other members that include industries that support the dietary supplement industry, such as testing laboratories, attorneys, as well as packaging and other label type associate members. Here are some of our members that you may recognize these brands from your day-to-day life, and some of them would be behind the scenes because they would be providing materials that go into finished dietary supplements. So the introduction to the council also provides as a disclosure that you are hearing from one of the scientists that's part of the dietary supplement industry. So who takes a dietary supplement? According to the 2014 CRN Consumer Survey on Dietary Supplements, we know that over 2/3 of Americans take dietary supplements. That is why CRN and SCIPTA felt like it was a good opportunity to educate nurses and pharmacists, nurse practitioners, other healthcare providers about these products, because this means about 2/3 of your patients and customers may be taking one or more dietary supplements. And it's so vital that consumers and patients have an open dialogue with their healthcare providers about the products they are taking. And this is how we will get the best benefit of these products as well as maintain safety. Again, 2/3 of Americans taking dietary supplements as part of a healthy lifestyle. Now, this slide that you see here provides a bit of a look at today's agenda. We've selected 10 dietary supplement products that you would likely encounter in your day-to-day practice. So some of the more common probiotics, but we used a little bit of judgment here about what I've seen as a practitioner, as well as what we get lots of questions about. This is something that's always in flux. So the most popular by far, and has been for many years, of the dietary supplement category is the multivitamin. And about 1/2 of Americans take a multivitamin. When asked why Americans take multivitamins, among the top reasons for taking them include for overall health, as well as to fill nutrient gaps that are not met through food. Now, we all know that everyone's goal is to get all of our nutrient requirements through diet alone. However, survey data, when we look at what people eat, both through food frequency questionnaires as well as biomarker data that's collected as part of the U.S. government survey of what people eat in America, and that's known as the NHANES data set. When we look at this data, we find that most of Americans do fall short in one or more nutrients. This data comes from NHANES 2005 to 2008, and you see 94%, so the strong majority of Americans falling short in vitamin D intake. And we know that's the case because vitamin D is not really prevalent in the diet. So if you are not engaging in outside time, or if when you're outside you're using sunscreen, you typically fall short in your vitamin D needs. You can see the majority of Americans also falling short in vitamin E and magnesium, as well as significant shortfalls in other areas. Now, that would say, okay, well, that's from diet surveys alone and biomarker. What if you add the impact of fortified food and dietary supplements? So again, once again, using the NHANES data, where they do get the information on what people eat, as well as the dietary supplements and fortified foods they eat, you can see that the black in this, where these red arrows are filling in, this represents the shortfalls even after the consideration of fortified food and supplements. So if you take a look at vitamin D, you remember that about 90% of Americans fell short with food alone. That would be down at the bottom of the graph, but when you add the impact of fortified food and supplements, which would be the dark blue piece, you still are left with 70% of Americans, the population, not meeting the recommended intake for vitamin D. So these are significant shortfalls, meaningful shortfalls, and a multivitamin is able to fill those nutrient gaps. Now, often the scientific or policymaker community will be asked the question, well, do multivitamins work? And that's a really good question, but you have to ask yourself, work for what? Now, it's well established, as we've already discussed, that they work to fill nutrient gaps. And we know that having the adequate nutrient levels over a lifetime carries great benefit. That's why we have targeted nutrient intake levels established by the Institute of Medicine. So what can take place is when the scientific question is asked, do multivitamins work? Well, people start to misask the question and say, well, do they work for chronic disease risk reduction? Do they reduce the incidence of heart disease? Do they reduce the incidence of cancer? Now, these are logical questions to ask. However, we know that the benefit of a multivitamin for impacting these conditions, both heart disease or cancer or other chronic diseases, is going to be from having the right nutrient levels over a long period of time. Ideally, a lifetime of nutrient adequacy is where you're going to see the benefit. And for the scientists in the webinar, we know that to investigate something with its impact over a lifetime can be very difficult, introduces challenges. When the questions are asked about do a multivitamin work, they often go to the randomized controlled trials. Now, this next slide I want to show you shows some of the limitations that a randomized controlled trial has when you're looking at nutrient questions. For example, in a randomized controlled trial, which is designed specifically to test the effects of a pharmaceutical intervention or a drug, you always have a placebo group. And in that placebo group, they're not exposed to any of the drug. Well, in a nutrition study, that cannot exist. These are essential nutrients, so you always are going to have some nutrient intake from the diet, or else it would be dangerous and unethical. So we always have to remember there's no true placebo group. And building on that, we know that for that reason, the baseline status of someone's nutrients. So if you're trying to evaluate the effect of calcium on bone health, you have to look at the baseline status of the people in your study. Were they all calcium replete? Did they have plenty of calcium? Or were they slightly insufficient? Because you're only going to see great benefit for calcium and bone health when you fill that nutrient gap and you add that calcium to make sure they get enough. So variety of reasons here that we have to modify our expectations from drug-like randomized controlled trials that look at nutrients. Even with these limitations, however, we have had large-scale, long-term randomized controlled trials of the multivitamin. Here is one in particularly where 14,000 men, almost 15,000 men, took a multivitamin for between 10 and 13 years, and you saw an 8% statistically significant risk reduction in total cancers, plus if you looked at colorectal cancer alone, you saw 11% statistically significant reduction in cancer. Now, these are meaningful, once again, and should not be ignored. And so we are beginning to see evidence of the multivitamin's benefit. I will say these types of studies are extremely expensive to design and fund, and we need to encourage, the research agenda to include additional studies on the multivitamin and dietary supplements in general. Now, when you're recommending your clients to pick a multi or helping assist them pick a multi, there's lots of choices out there. So the things you need to think about would be an appropriate form for their age and gender. We know that nutrient needs change throughout life, and so we see a variety of products that are specifically designed for that age and gender. For example, we know that as we age, our ability to absorb things like vitamin B12 become very compromised, and so supplementation becomes critical to support healthy levels of B12 in elderly people. So much so that the 2010 dietary guidelines recommended that B12 is a specific nutrient of concern for elderly and to consider supplementation. We see similar things with iron. For example, men don't typically need iron unless a lab test says so, but women who are menstruating will often need a multivitamin with regular iron intake. Also with calcium and magnesium, we have to remember that a multivitamin provides a spectrum of nutrients, and often large molecules like calcium and magnesium are hard to squeeze a lot into that multi. So you take a look at the levels. They'll often be, 100 milligrams of calcium, sometimes less, and individuals may need anywhere from 600 to 1,000 supplemental milligrams of calcium, so you may need to add additional individual nutrients. Also, we have a lot of different delivery forms for the multivitamin. We have tablets and capsules, liquids, we have gummies, and remember gummies, again, an interesting matrix, lots of fun, but it puts some limitations on the types of nutrients. So it's important to not only evaluate the delivery form, but also to evaluate what nutrients are found in that delivery form. And then, of course, we have a variety of potencies, if you will, or levels or forms of nutrients. And you see a lot of products that will be formulated at or below the RDA. These are classic multis that can be used to fill nutrient gaps. And then you have some where they'll have higher amounts of certain nutrients, whether they're to support energy levels or give enough calcium or things like that. So take a look at the formula, and there are choices to make. Moving right along to our second ingredient, we're going to take a look at probiotics, where 7% of the population does take a probiotic. And you may ask the question, what are probiotics? And the FAO, WHO did define in 2013 what a probiotic is, and their definition was a live microorganism that, when administered in adequate amounts, confers a health benefit to the host. So you may have heard some of the statistics. For example, there are more probiotics, or what I call bugs, in the gastrointestinal system than there are cells in the human body. And if you were to assess the DNA of these probiotics, there's more DNA in the bacteria living in your gastrointestinal system than there is in your entire body. So it's a really amazing thing to think about. And some clinicians have begun to look at a probiotic, the presence of probiotics in your gastrointestinal system, almost like an extra organ, because these probiotics perform a variety of important physiological functions that are part of our existence. For example, probiotics can help break down certain foods as they use those foods as their fuel. Probiotics can actually convert certain nutrients. Probiotics can compete with other bacteria that might be trying to live in the gut that are more pathogenic. So essentially competitively inhibiting opportunistic organisms from causing infection. Probiotics also give off a variety of signaling compounds. So for example, the probiotic will give off a signaling compound that then the body will respond to, and they've shown that certain healthy gut environments can have lower levels of inflammation and more efficient immune response. So lots of important things going on with these buggers, lots of research going on, and you'll note that only 7% of the population currently takes a probiotic, but this is an area we see a lot of growth. Why do people take probiotics? For many reasons, but what I have here is I've put together just an outline of some of the more well-researched areas, well known for using to reduce the incidence of antibiotic-associated diarrhea as well as infectious diarrhea. People will use it in traveling situations, also childhood diarrhea. Good evidence in necrotizing enterocolitis, as well as specific strains that have been shown to reduce Clostridium difficile infections. For immune health, an emerging area, we're seeing that probiotics and having a healthy gut has an impact on the immune response, so much so that it can influence respiratory infections, eczema, vaginitis, other conditions. And then with the additional research that's being done in this area and resources being put to understanding the role of probiotics, we're seeing some emerging science looking at the impact of a healthy gut on cognitive function, cardiovascular function, irritable bowel syndrome, and even in the area of maintaining healthy weight. So again, when we choose a product, it's important to understand that if there is a lot of research in one area on a probiotic, on a particular strain of probiotic, you cannot assume that other strains will give us that benefit. So for example, you'll see in the table to the right, Saccharomyces boulardii, and it's been studied to help prevent and treat antibiotic-associated diarrhea. And this is a very unique beneficial yeast in this case, and it is approved as an over-the-counter and a prescription in other parts of the world, and it has a lot of research very specifically on Clostridium infections. And so this is one, if you were interested in using it to manage or prevent Clostridium, you would want to use a specific strain. So now there are general digestive benefits from any of the lactic acid producers. So these are the ones that are commonly used in things like yogurt, Lactobacillus acidophilus. These are the ones you always want to replace after you've taken antibiotics. In addition, probiotics have a very strong safety profile. You have sometimes when you start probiotics, you have a little bit of GI upset, maybe some gas, but as the bugs get in there and they reestablish themselves and you get some ecosystem balancing, people usually will feel better and those side effects will go away. Now, there is a risk in immune compromise. Remember, these are live bacteria, and these are live bacteria that are meant to live inside of us. However, if someone's immune system is compromised, you really want to be making sure you're very careful with managing that patient and talking to their primary care and whoever's managing their condition. Moving on to omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, DHA. These are what a lot of people consider when you think of fish oil, essential fatty acids found in fish oil. Another strong category with 13% of Americans consuming a omega-3 fatty acid product. Why are omega-3 fatty acids so important? The reason is they are essential nutrients for a variety of physiological functions, and they are available to us in our diet. However, the standard American diet, or the SAD diet, is very low in sources of omega-3, which tend to be cold water fatty fish, sardines, anchovies, salmon, cold water salmon. Now, I have been in clinical practice for over a bunch of years, and when I talk to people about their diets, you know, those are not the types of things that come to the top of the list as favorite foods: anchovies, sardines, cold water fish. So what I'm trying to get to is that most people's diet is woefully deficient in omega-3s, but very rich in omega-6 essential fatty acids. And these come from things like soy oil, corn oil, safflower oil, canola oil. And so if you think of a diet high in processed food, we have plenty of omega-6s, but very little omega-3 fats. And that's where we get to the next slide, where the balance of these two essential fatty acids groups plays a pivotal role in the types of eicosanoids and prostaglandins our body produces in response to infection, inflammation, irritation, anger. So when we release uh, these bioactive components inside of our body, the omega-3s produce less inflammatory mediators, the leukotriene 5 series, prostaglandin E3 series, the prostaglandin E1 series, which has a beneficial effect on physiology, as opposed to the omega-6 family, which puts out a lot of the pro-inflammatory prostaglandin E2, thromboxane A2, and leukotriene 4 series. These all, of course, as you guys know, are targets of our non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. So instead of giving something that blocks those, like a COX-2 inhibitor, we like to give precursors of healthy fats to create a balanced inflammatory status. When you're choosing an omega-3 supplement, there are lots to choose on. We have the sources you'll see on the left: fish oil, krill oil. We have vegetarian sourced EPA, DHA products from algae. We also have the vegetarian omega-3 products like flax oil, which provide a precursor to EPA and DHA. I will note with fish oil, within that category, you have a lot of options as well. You have your standard fish body oil, which is typically 18% EPA and 12% DHA. So for example, a 1,000 milligram capsule is going to have 180 milligrams EPA and 120 milligrams DHA. The reason I'm spelling that out is a lot of people make the mistake to think 1,000 milligrams has 1,000 milligrams of omega-3. That's not true. It has 1,000 milligrams of fish oil, and the beneficial EPA and DHA will be some subset of that. Now, you can take that approximately 30% EPA DHA combination in fish body oil, and you can concentrate it. So you can up the levels of EPA and DHA in a fish oil product, and those products are available and tend to increase compliance. And then, of course, we have our classic old cod liver oil, which is fish liver oil that contains other fat-soluble vitamins like A and D. Krill oil has become popular because of its phospholipid structure, some science suggesting that there is extra benefits provided by the phospholipid structure as well as other naturally occurring antioxidants in krill oil. And then we have our vegetarian EPA DHA for those who keep vegetarian or sometimes even kosher. And these are algae-based. That they are marketed because they don't carry the potential for fishy taste, and they're totally vegetarian. Or you can use products like flax oil, where the hope is that your body is able to convert that 18-carbon ALA omega-3 to the 20 and 22-carbon EPA DHA. So I add this slide as a reference for those who watch this webinar. You can have later, but these are a variety of intake recommendations from authoritative nutrition bodies, or i.e. target levels. The most commonly cited being in the middle of the top chart, the American Heart Association, and theirs I will just review is 500 milligrams a day EPA plus DHA combined, just to keep your heart healthy. So that's just part of a heart healthy diet, and you can achieve that from 2 servings of cold water fatty fish weekly. So anyone falling short of 2 servings weekly would be a candidate for supplementation. Now, anyone with a risk marker for heart disease, which could be blood pressure, could be a BMI, it could be lipid levels, the American Heart Association ups the recommendation to 1,000 milligrams a day, and that's where supplementation becomes very.
Thank you, Duffy. And again, my name is Andrea Wong. Next to multivitamins, which Duffy mentioned, calcium and vitamin D are 2 of the most popular dietary supplements in the U.S. market, with 16% of U.S. adults taking a calcium-containing supplement and 21% taking a vitamin D supplement. And of course, there's overlap between these 2 because they're often sold as combination products. So why are Americans taking calcium and vitamin D? Well, primarily, they're used to fill nutrient gaps. Government data show that Americans are falling short of both nutrients. For calcium, 44% of Americans do not meet their average requirements when considering food sources only. This number drops down to 15% in individuals who consume calcium-containing dietary supplements. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, for vitamin D, you see a more dramatic effect, with 95% of Americans not meeting their vitamin D needs when considering food sources alone, and this number dropping down to 21% when vitamin D containing supplements are considered. Additionally, the dietary guidelines for Americans will be revised in 2015, so very shortly, and it looks like calcium and vitamin D will be called out as nutrients of public health concern based on their underconsumption and their importance to bone health. So as mentioned, calcium is very important for strong bones and can reduce the risk of osteoporosis. And vitamin D's role in bone health is that it helps the body to absorb calcium. Vitamin D has a number of other roles in the body in addition to its role in bone health, and these are listed on the slide. This is not surprising because many cells within the body have vitamin D receptors and thus help in the function of very many bodily functions. So how much calcium do we need and when do we need it? Well, the amount depends on age, gender, and dietary intake. And you can see here on the slide, the Institute of Medicine, or IOM, has set recommended dietary allowances for calcium based on age and gender. So for adults, you need about 1,000 milligrams per day, but as we get older, there's a natural loss of calcium in our bodies, so we need more. And particularly in females, you'll see that starting in the age 50, you need about 200 milligrams more of calcium. Now, when considering dietary sources, you want to ask your patients what foods they are eating that might contain calcium. So dairy products such as milk, yogurt, and cheese are very high in calcium. Certain green vegetables like kale, broccoli, and Chinese cabbage, and then also other foods like fish contain calcium in smaller amounts. When considering recommendations for your patients, you should also look at whether or not your patients are taking multivitamins, because many multivitamins will contain calcium in small amounts, and also if they're taking antacids in the form of calcium carbonate. So these contribute to the overall calcium intake. When providing your recommendations, if you do recommend that your patients take a higher amount of calcium in the form of a supplement, keep in mind that absorption is best when consuming up to 500 milligrams at a time. So if you are recommending a dose of 1,000 milligrams, you might want to recommend cutting that dose into 2 to ensure maximal absorption. Moving on to vitamin D, again, the amount that we need depends on our age, as well as sun exposure and dietary intake. And here on this chart, we see that the IOM has set recommended dietary allowances for vitamin D, and it generally stays the same throughout adulthood, about 15 micrograms. I've also listed in parentheses the amount in international units or IUs, because that's the amount that's currently on product labels, and that's what your customers will be more familiar with. Now, at the age of 70 or older, the amount of vitamin D you need is a little bit more. Although the IOM has set recommendations, there are a number of other organizations that recommend different amounts. So for example, the National Osteoporosis Foundation recommends 400 to 800 IUs for adults less than 50 years of age, and then for older adults, the amount increases from 800 to 1,000 IUs. Additionally, the North American Menopause Society recommends 700 to 800 IUs in women who are at risk for deficiency due to low sun. Now, speaking of sun, vitamin D is unique in that you can synthesize vitamin D in your skin from direct sun exposure. However, vitamin D synthesis rates can be affected by a number of different factors, including the season, time of day, length of day, cloud cover, smog, skin melanin content, and sunscreen. And keep in mind, right now the days are getting shorter, so we might need more as our skin is not making as much. So then we turn to food sources. Unfortunately, very few foods naturally contain vitamin D. There are some foods that are fortified with vitamin D. For example, in the US, there's voluntary fortification of our milk supply. Some ready-to-eat breakfast cereals, orange juices, yogurt, and margarine are also fortified. Looking at dietary supplements, there are two forms that are available in the marketplace, vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. The more common form that you'll see in the market is vitamin D3. The available research indicates that firm conclusions about any differing effects of these two forms can't be drawn at this time. However, there appears to be some evidence that at high doses, vitamin D is less potent. Another thing to keep in mind when you're giving your recommendations to customers or patients is that vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so it's a good idea to take that with food, particularly foods that contain fat. Let's move on to our next dietary supplement category, which is melatonin. Now, melatonin is not a nutrient per se, but it's actually a hormone, and it is getting very popular in the marketplace with 4% of U.S. adults taking this supplement. As I mentioned, it's a hormone. It's produced by the pineal gland, and it's involved in our bodies in circadian rhythm. And that's our internal body clock that regulates our approximately 24-hour cycle of biological processes, and so it's important in determining sleeping patterns. Its production is suppressed by bright light during the day and increases in darkness, telling us it's time to sleep. Levels of melatonin in our body tend to decline with age, so we might need more as we get older, but there are inter-individual differences. It's used primarily for sleep support and jet lag, but there are other therapeutic uses which I won't go into today. It can be used for insomnia that's associated with health conditions such as depression, fibromyalgia, and Alzheimer's disease. Now this chart just shows the endogenous melatonin levels in our body on a 24-hour cycle. So during the daytime, melatonin levels are low and they begin to increase in the evening, peaking in the middle of the night, and then falling to low daytime levels in the morning. Now there's a common belief that melatonin acts as a sedative, but in fact it actually acts as a phase shifter. So if you take melatonin in the evening, it will shift the curve you see to the left, signaling to your body at an earlier time that it's time to go to sleep. Melatonin has a very short half-life, so levels don't accumulate in the body over time. How much melatonin do we need and when should we take it? Common dosages that are available in the market range from 0.3 to 10 milligrams, although there are doses as low as 0.1 milligram and as high as even 20 milligram if you take a look at internet searches. Although there's a wide range of doses, there's a lot of clinical research that indicates the lower end of the range, 0.3 to 3 milligrams, is the most effective for sleep support. But again, there are inter-individual differences, so some people might need more, some people might need less. Most product labels indicate that melatonin should be taken at bedtime. However, there is some research showing that the optimal time is 9 to 11 hours before the midpoint of sleep. So if your midpoint of sleep is 4 a.m., then you would take melatonin between 5 and 7 p.m. And finally, for jet lag, the common instruction is to take melatonin on the arrival day at your destination and continue for 2 to 5 days, depending on how many time zones you're crossing. Moving on to protein, this is in the form of powders or drinks or bars, and it's consumed by 7% of the U.S. population in adults. Why are people taking protein supplements? Well, it's very popular for sports nutrition. It can help build muscle mass and strength. It can help with endurance as well as muscle recovery and tissue repair after exercise. Protein supplements are also used for weight management. It helps with satiety or feeling full after a meal, and it can also help to build lean body mass. And finally, I'm going to expand on its third emerging use, which is in healthy aging.
I'm ready.
Go ahead.
All right, this is Jim Griffith speaking, giving a session for the Skip to Seminar on dietary supplements. Thank you, Andrea, for that kind introduction. I'm going to cover the next three product categories that should be of interest to the SCIPTA audience. The first is glucosamine and or chondroitin. I'm going to highlight that on the slide right here. 7% of U.S. adults take glucosamine and or chondroitin. It is one of the most popular condition-specific supplements, and they're often taken together because they are found to be in a complementary biological activity. So these two are often found as a combo product on the marketplace. Glucosamine, also known as chitosamine, although the name you will find if you go into a pharmacy or any type of a mass market situation will be glucosamine. Chemically, it's an amino sugar, 2-amino-deoxyglucose. The natural source for glucosamine is shellfish, but there are also vegetarian options that are available processed from corn, and it can be synthesized in the laboratory, but that is a rather expensive route of production. Some of the available forms are glucosamine hydrochloride and acetylglucosamine, also called NAG, and glucosamine sulfate. Chondroitin is the other compound found in this particular combination product. It's a complex carbohydrate, chemically chondroitinin 4. The natural source is cartilage, oftentimes shark or bovine cartilage, sometimes even trachea from the bovine source. There are synthetic options available, but once again, very expensive to produce. There are no natural sources of chondroitin, so any intake has to be through supplement or a form such as this, and the available forms are chondroitin sulfate. Why do people take glucosamine and chondroitin? They take it for joint health, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, TMJ arthritis, that's temporomandibular joint, that's the point where your lower jaw hinges onto your the rest of your face skeletal, and pain, especially joint and back pain. Side effects from these products that need to be considered are mild gastrointestinal effects, oftentimes seen from those that have not experienced using this product before. If you have a pre-existing allergy to shellfish, you could develop some reaction to the glucosamine, since that is indeed its primary raw material for production. And there are drug interactions, especially with blood thinners, which react with many, many drugs and dietary and actually food ingredients. And some cancer chemotherapy agents also are affected by glucosamine and chondroitin. So those are things to consider when taking this product. Some of the evidence for glucosamine and chondroitin use is used primarily to support betterment of knee function, lessening of knee pain, and both products are used in that fashion. The TMJ, once again, the jaw joint function and pain, glucosamine has been found to be somewhat effective. And hand osteoarthritis function and pain, chondroitin was found to be supportive in lessening those the pain and arthritic function. There's less evidence available for rheumatoid arthritis, and some of the inconsistencies as one looks at the various clinical studies have to do with the study design, whether it's a glucosamine hydrochloride or glucosamine sulfate, and also some of the dose and dosing parameters. When we look at concentrations, glucosamine hydrochloride is often given 1,500 milligrams, either as a bolus or split 3 times a day. Glucosamine sulfate also at 1,500 milligram bolus or split, and chondroitin sulfate ranges from 200 to 400 twice or 3 times a day. And many of the randomized clinical trials use a bolus dose of 1,200 milligrams of chondroitin. At this point, we're going to move to the next category I would like to cover today, which are herbals and botanicals. You see from the chart that roughly 18%, roughly 1 in 5 U.S. adults are taking some type of a botanical product. The botanicals and herbals that are mostly found in the marketplace have to, if we look at the mainstream, you see compounds like horehound and yohimbe. Horehound is on this chart because it's used extensively in over-the-counter cough preparations, and once again, the mainstream, mainly business-to-business uses of these types of botanicals. Horehound is #1, and yohimbe is also found in personal care products and in a lot of topical preparations, and so those two are found very high on this list because of those other uses. If we look at natural channels, which are mainly what you would find in a health food store, you see a number of compounds, turmeric, various wheat and barley grasses, etc. Those are the top 10 in both of those categories. If we look at the next list, I tried to just alphabetically put some that were found on the remaining high use levels, both mainstream and natural channels. And you'll see some that you recognize, some that are actually foods like garlic and ginger. You'll see others that are found in beverages, green coffee, green tea. You'll see some that are obviously used as a tea and they're as an herbal tea, chamomile, and flavors like peppermint, and even a non-nutritive sweetener like stevia. So there's a wide range of materials that are being used as botanical herbal products in the dietary supplement space, and this just gives you a snapshot of what some of those might be. If we look at some of the definitions, you'll see that botanical is actually anything having to do with a plant or plant part. That's not too narrow a definition, so we like to use the term herb, which is a plant used in cooking, tea, or medicinal purposes, with herbal having to do with those plants. And if you confront the literature or actually look at products, you will see that oftentimes a botanical herbal is referred to by its genus species, the Latin binomial, and here are a couple of examples: black cohosh, Actaea, racemosa, ginger, Zingiber officinale, and Cava cava piper methysticum. So it gives you a chance to know how to find and identify these products in the marketplace. Which plant parts are being used in the dietary supplement space? Whole plant, fruit, berries, flowers, bark, leaves, stems, twigs, roots, rhizomes. It's actually almost every part. In fact, I think every part is covered by that list. I can't think of any plant part that isn't being used somewhere in some fashion in the botanical herbal dietary supplement market. Dosage forms, once again, you see things that are familiar like fresh or dried. Those are obviously easy to visualize from your own cooking and from your own spice cabinet. Extracts, an example might be some of the flavors that you would use in baking. Tinctures and decoctions are various solvents and methods of boiling and simmering the products. Tea is something you can visualize. It's an infusion steeped with the addition of boiling water. And many of these products are then dehydrated or in some fashion prepared into powders, which can then go into capsules or be tableted. Quality is important for botanicals and herbals. One would like to think that they are being standardized both to the identity and quantification of the various herbal and constituents within a particular product. It's important to know which plant part is being used and how that's being labeled as it moves through business to business and other supply chains. Consistency batch to batch oftentimes is evaluated for quality through a marker compound. This may just be a either easy to identify marker or maybe a marker of highest level. And biological activity is also viewed from a quality standpoint through hopefully biomarker compounds, those compounds that are most often associated with whatever the desired effect might be. It's great when both the biomarker and the original quality marker are the same constituent, but in reality, sometimes there is a distinction as one may be easier to quantify or easier to measure. And quality, once again, is often through customers come back through either brand recognition, brand longevity, or even third-party certification verification programs. Other issues that that weigh in on botanical and herbal quality are good manufacturing practices. These control for quality, such as processes, personnel, the actual product, and the documentation. I think it's important to look at some of the aspects covered by GMPs, and those are identification, consistency, the solvents that were being used, and hopefully the lack of contaminants such as heavy metals and pesticides, And of course, adulterants are never expected to be part of a good quality botanical or herbal ingredient. And finally, areas to consider when coming across herbals are on their action. Their diverse physiological action ranges from mild to quite potent. There's subtle, long-term, chronic bioactivity, as well as dramatic, intermediate bioactivity that can be observed from some of these botanicals. And the activity is dependent upon physiological action, the dose, the dosing regimen, the chemical constituents, what plant parts, how was it prepared, where was it grown, and once again the solvents that were used, and hopefully the lack of contaminants and adulterants as discussed under the good manufacturing practices. And the last ingredient I would like to discuss is cranberry. It is not used by an extensive number of adult Americans, but still 4% is nothing to take too lightly. If we look at some of the detail on cranberry, its Latin binomial, as just discussed, is Vaccinium macrocarpos. Cranberry juice and cranberry juice extract are both found in the marketplace, and the plant part that is used, of course, is the bright red berry. And these are used primarily for urinary tract infection, UTIs, neurogenic bladder, urinary deodorizer with incontinence, and there's some early research that it is being investigated for benign prostatic hyperplasia. Things to consider with cranberry: it doesn't work for everyone. Most of the persuasive data is on women with high risk for recurring UTIs, urinary tract infection. It doesn't acidify the urine or diminish the bacteria, but does change the adherence properties of those bacteria within the urinary tract. The acidity of the juice can be a problem because it can increase GI disturbance, and also some folks do not like the high acidity of the juice. Therefore, there's organoleptic issues with consuming this product over and over. The oxalates in the juices can lead to bladder and kidney stones. And as previously discussed with warfarin, Coumadin, and other blood thinners, which do react and are interacted upon by many constituents, cranberry can and oftentimes can be at least evaluated by a medical professional for any potential interaction with those type of products. Doses for cranberry are oftentimes just the juice, 8 ounces of juice or 250 milliliters of the juice, cranberry juice cocktail, or a concentrated cranberry juice extract, often found in a capsule form, running roughly 300 to 400 milligrams. So with that, I'm going to pass on to the wrap-up with our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Jim. And I'm going to end off our webinar with some practical extras, so some general information that may be helpful for you in your practice. First, we have a guide here called How to Read a Supplement Label, and there's a lot of information on this slide, but fear not, it's available on our CRN website. The link is there, and it's easy to find on our website. And this is a useful tool should your patients have questions about how to decipher a supplement label. The example on our screen is a multivitamin, multimineral supplement. And on the left-hand side, I just like to call it a little bit of information. You see the individual vitamins and minerals that are listed, as well as the amount per serving. And on the right-hand side, you see a percent daily value. And what this means is it tells you what percentage of the recommended daily intake for each nutrient that is provided by this particular supplement. You'll notice at the very bottom of the panel for boron, there is an asterisk under daily value, and this is placed for substances where a DV, a daily value, has not been established. The supplement labeling requirements have not changed for many years in the U.S. However, FDA proposed sweeping changes to both nutrition and supplement facts labeling for food and dietary supplements, respectively, earlier this year. There are many proposed changes and would require hours to go through all of them, but I'd like to note a couple. One is that the recommended daily intakes, or the RDIs, for many nutrients will either increase or decrease. And I've put a table on the screen just to give you some examples. So for calcium, the current RDI is 1,000 milligrams, and FDA has proposed that this will increase to 1,300 milligrams. What this means is that for calcium, a product that currently provides 100% of the daily value, or 1,000 milligrams, will only provide 77% of the daily value if you use the future proposed calculation. The other thing to note is that units of measure might change for some vitamins. So currently, some units of measure are in micrograms or milligrams, and some are in international units or IUs, and FDA is trying to move everything to a consistent approach, so all of the units of measure will be in metric units. Next, I'd like to call out a topic that's of concern, and that is tainted products that are illegally marketed as dietary supplements. This is not as much of a concern on store shelves as it is on internet websites. However, it's something that you should be aware of for your customers and your patients. So these products might contain active ingredients that are in FDA-approved drugs or their analogs or other substances such as steroids. And they will be labeled as an alternative to drug X or as a legal alternative to a particular steroid. There are three common categories for tainted products. One is bodybuilding, so these products might contain anabolic steroids. Secondly, we have sexual enhancement products, which are marketed as natural enhancers, but actually might contain sildenafil, which is Viagra. And the third category is the weight loss category. Some products might contain sibutramine, which was previously marketed as a prescription drug for obesity, but has subsequently been withdrawn from the market and is an illegal substance. Now, FDA does maintain a list of products they have identified on their website. However, there's always more products popping up. So a way to keep track of this is to subscribe to FDA's RSS feed or email alerts and keep your customers apprised of the updates. But also take a look at warning signs when you look at product labeling and advertising. Do these products claim to be alternatives for drugs, or do they have effects that are similar to prescription drugs? And does the claim it makes sound too good to be true? Does it promise instant results, or does it promise to treat or cure diseases? And finally, I'd like to point you out to some helpful resources. In addition to the FDA website, there are various resources available on the ingredients that we have discussed today, as well as many others that are available on the marketplace. So these include government websites, such as the National Institutes of Health Office of Dietary Supplements website, and you can see the links for all of these here, and also resources for healthcare practitioners, such as the Natural Medicines Comprehensive Database. There are a lot more tools available. These are just a few options for you to consult to help out your customers and patients. And with that, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Duffy and Jim, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.